got an incredible giveaway for you this month in the shape of the Red plugin suite from Focusrite. This amazing package normally costs £229, but it's all yours for free when you buy Computer Music issue 236. Bringing the iconic sound of classic Focusrite mixing hardware to your DAW, the suite comprises the Red 2 EQ and Red 3 compressor. We're going to show you how to use both of these super smooth processors and how to mix the drums on this rock track to give it clarity, definition and punch. To follow our tutorial, load the stems from the tutorial files Red Suite stems subfolder onto separate audio tracks in your DAW, making sure that any warping options are turned off. The guitar and bass tracks have been mixed already, but the drums sound flabby and inconsistent. We'll mix the drums later in the tutorial, but for now, let's just get a grip on the features and functions of the Red plugin suite's two processors, the Red 2 equalizer and Red 3 compressor. Route all the drum tracks to a group bus named Drum Bus, and place Red 2 on the bus, muting the guitar and bass tracks for now. The Red 2 equalizer recreates the smooth analog EQ curves of the Red 2 hardware, itself based on Focusrite's ISA 110 unit. It features 6 bands of filtering and EQ, beginning with the high-pass filter on the left. Turn it up to enable the filter and increase it to progressively filter away the low end, up to 330 Hz. The low-pass control on the right does likewise for the top end, cutting treble down to 3.9 kHz. The low shelf control sets the frequency at which the low shelving filter operates. Frequencies below this point will be boosted or attenuated, depending on the position of the gain control directly above it. Pull low shelf right down to 33 Hz, for example, to cut or boost sub-bass frequencies. Push it right up to 270 Hz, and the woody fundamental tones of the snare are also affected. High shelf works similarly, but affects frequencies above a certain point. The two inner bands are peaking filters, focused on the lower and upper mid-range respectively. Like the shelves, you set the frequency with the lower knob and then cut and boost with the gain control. Try setting low mid to about 600 Hz and adjusting gain to hear how it affects the ringing tones of the snare drum. Use it to cut about 4 dB. There's also a Q knob. At minimum Q, the filter affects a broad range of frequencies. Increasing it means the filter affects a narrow range, which is most useful for cutting resonances at specific frequencies. Try turning it right up on the low midband to hear how the snare's ringing is still reduced, but with less effect on neighbouring frequencies. The final control, the far right gain knob, simply sets the output level. Useful for balancing the signal if your EQ modifications have changed its perceived level. Now bypass Red 2 and load up its companion, the Red 3 compressor. Like Red 2, it's based on Focusrite's Red series hardware, and it uses the same circuit architecture as the classic ISA130 processor. This compressor has a very soft knee, which means compression is introduced gradually as the signal approaches the threshold point, rather than suddenly kicking in once it's reached. This gives a very smooth, natural and transparent compression style. Input allows you to boost or cut the incoming signal level, which is occasionally handy for attenuating a signal that's too loud and is triggering the compression too easily. Threshold sets the level a signal must exceed for full compression to be applied. Though as we just said, the soft knee design means that a signal under the threshold will still be subject to some compression. The central meter shows the input or output signal level, and when set to input there's a red marker indicating the threshold as well. Compression is really just a sort of automatic volume control, and the adjacent gain reduction meter shows us by how much the level is being reduced. Even though we haven't adjusted the settings yet and the signal is barely touching the -10 dB threshold, our drum beat's hardest hits are still being compressed lightly due to Red 3's soft knee. Ratio is kinda like compression strength. If the incoming signal goes over the threshold by, say, 6 dB and the ratio is 3:1, then compression will be applied so that the outgoing signal exceeds the threshold by only 2 dB, that is, a third of 6 dB. Red 3's ratio goes from a mild 1.5:1 up to infinity, which means that the compressor acts as a limiter, reducing the signal's level so that it equals the threshold. Pull threshold right down to -30 dB and the effects of the ratio control become much more obvious. Leave it at 5:1 when you're done experimenting. When a signal crosses the threshold, it takes a little time for the compressor to react, as determined by the attack control. With a fast attack, the compressor quickly reacts to transients, flattening them out. With a slow attack, transients can pop through before the compressor fully reacts, enhancing impact. Release sets how long it takes for compression to end once the signal falls below the threshold, but this knob only takes effect when auto-release is off. Fast settings mean the compressor can recover quickly, useful for instance for treating successive drum hits. Slow settings are useful for more general level management. With auto-release enabled, release time varies according to the dynamics of the signal, which can work great on complex material containing multiple sounds, such as on the master bus. Because compression reduces signal level, the compressor's output can end up quieter than the original sound. To compensate, use the makeup gain control. Finally, the dry-wet knob lets you blend the original and compressed signals, which can be extremely useful. If you love the sound of the compression you've dialed in, but it's too aggressive and extreme for the mix, just pull back the dry-wet control to balance it out. So we've seen how it works, now let's put the Red plugin suite to work on our drum mix. Remove the plugins from the drum bus and unmute the guitar and bass tracks. Place a Red 2 equalizer on the kick channel. Set low mid to just above 300 Hz and cut by the full amount of -16 dB to remove the boxy lower mid tones. You can experiment with the cue. About 10 o'clock sounds good to us. Next, boost high mid about 12 dB and sweep it till you hear the slap of the beater coming through. Five kHz works here. Add the Red 3 compressor next in the chain. Set ratio to 4:1, threshold to -27 dB, auto release off and release at minimum. Now adjust attack and hear what happens. A faster setting crushes the slappy transient, whereas slow settings allow more of it to pop through. In this mix we like it around 3 o'clock, so the kick still sounds quite fat, but with the compressor controlling the low end boom. Use makeup gain to make up the lost volume. About 2 dB is all it needs. Next, let's focus on the snare. Add a Red 2 equalizer and solo the track so we can listen for any trouble spots. There's some low end bleeding in from the kick drum track, so roll up the high pass to about 150 Hz to take care of it. The ringing of the snare is also a bit over the top, so boost the low mid control about +8 dB and sweep it till you hear the ringing jump out. It's around 600 Hz. Now pull the gain down to about -6 dB. And increase Q to 2 o'clock to focus the cut some more. Unsolo the snare so we can hear it in context with the mix. It sits well, but there's space for some extra top end. Boost high mid around 2 kHz to make the snare cut through. Around +4 dB is all it requires. Next up, add a Red 3 compressor. We'll use this to even out the hit-to-hit volume differences and emphasise the front-end crack. Set ratio to 3:1, auto release off, release to minimum, and attack about halfway. Now reduce the threshold till you see about 3 dB of gain reduction on each hit. Around -17 dB does it. Turn makeup gain up to around 3 dB to compensate for the level reduction. The effect is a bit obvious in places, but we can use the dry-wet control to blend the uncompressed signal back in for a more natural sound. The overheads track sounds good, but like the snare track, there's some kick drum leakage that could interfere with the low end. So add a Red 2 and roll the high pass up to 120 Hz. You can roll it up further for greater separation, but we quite like the low-end thump that it adds to the snare. To smooth the overhead's dynamics, add a Red 3. And pull threshold down to -30 dB for about 7 dB of gain reduction. Raising makeup gain to 7 dB to compensate. At this stage, the track is sounding good, but a little master bus EQ and compression will help bring it all together. So that's Focusrite's superb red plugin suite, worth £229, but yours for free. All you got to do is get Computer Music 236. If you like the sound of the red plugins, then check out the rest of Focusrite's extensive range of audio interfaces, preamps, channel strips, plugins, apps, and more. It's all at www.focusrite.com.